Hey, welcome back. We are getting ready to dig into chapter 5 of Ephesians. This has been a lot of fun. I hope you've enjoyed hanging out with me. I've enjoyed hanging out with you. That's kind of weird because I'm here all alone, but whatever. Going through chapter 5 today, there are a lot of things we could talk about, but there's just one thing that really stands out. In the beginning of the chapter, he talks about how that God is calling us to walk in love, God is calling us to walk in light, and God is calling us to walk in wisdom. And then he all of a sudden goes right into talking about marriage. And so today I just want to share this passage from you from Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 25. And it says this: "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might also present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church." Now, it would be really easy to go off and to talk about how the husbands should love their wives and wives should love their husbands. That's typical, and that's what this verse is talking about. But the thing that really hits me today is the fact that when I was young, I prayed for my wife. I prayed that God would send me the woman who I was supposed to be with, that he was preparing for me, that he'd protect her. I prayed that God would protect me. And that was long before I ever met Tennille. And I believe that God brought me the woman that I had been praying for. But in the same way as I am praying about what it looks like to have a family, I find myself praying through this passage and saying, God, yeah, I want to love my wife, and I want my wife to love me the way that you describe. But Father, I want to pray for my kids. I want to pray that my sons would be the kind of men that you talk about, that Paul talks about here in this passage. I pray that my sons would love their wives so much more than their own bodies, but never more than their love for Christ. I pray that God would make my sons into godly men and that I would be an example for them. I don't want to just love my wife for my sake. I want to love my wife for her sake and for their sake, so that they would have that example. And as I pray for my daughters, I pray that God would allow them to have such an incredible love for Christ that no man would be able to get to them without going through Christ first. And my prayer is that they would realize that any man who is worthy of them is a man who puts Christ first. In this world that we live in, we have such a selfish culture that puts our own needs and our own desires above anything else that matters, and it ends up in a mess. But when we put God first and our love for him first, then it makes every other relation in our life make sense and matter. And those are the kind of relationships that I want for my kids. And so today, maybe you're listening to this and you're a kid, and my challenge is to you to pray for your husband, to pray for your wife for the future. If you're a parent, then my prayer is that you would be challenged to love your husband or wife more, but also to be praying that God would prepare your sons and your daughters for the kind of relationships that Paul talks about here. Relationship that is based on love for Jesus Christ first, love for your spouse second, because as we put those things together, we find relationships that last and impact generations to come. God bless you. Thanks for hanging out with me today. We got one more chapter to go through, and I can't wait. It's probably the most exciting one in all the book of Ephesians, and the one that people talk about the most. And so we're going to dig into that next time. Have a great day. We'll see you then.